RDG Planning and Design is a nationally recognized multidisciplinary firm offering professional services in architecture, landscape architecture, interior design, lighting design, strategic planning, urban and comprehensive planning and design, graphic design, engineering, and integrated and public art. Diverse in knowledge and experience, they are united in their pursuit to create meaning together with their clients and in their communities, and by their drive to live responsibly and do it well. Decades of dedication to success had taken them around the world, and today their commitment to communication and technology allows them to engage clients anywhere from their offices in Colorado, Iowa, Missouri, Nebraska, and Wisconsin. You're listening to the Booked on Planning podcast, a project of the Nebraska chapter of the American Planning Association. In each episode, we dive into how cities function by talking with authors on housing, transportation, and everything in between. Join us as we get booked on planning. Welcome back, bookworms. I'm Stephanie Rouse.
And I'm Jennifer Hyatt.
And we're the hosts of the Booked on Planning podcast. In today's episode, we talked with author Kevin Fagan on his book, The Lost and Found, A True Story of Homelessness, Found Family, and Second Chances. This is a book that I brought to Jennifer. I thought it would be a really great read. It was a recommendation by one of my coworkers. We both work in kind of the world of continuum of cares and homeless outreach. This is somewhat of a new career path. And so it was a really good book to understand in the perspective of someone who's experiencing homelessness, what it's like and what they go through and how they make decisions and how hard it is just to get out of that situation.
Yeah. And even though I have had some personal experience plus just some professional experience with people suffering from both drug and alcohol addiction, none of the people that I've worked with in that capacity have gotten all the way to homelessness, especially the chronic homelessness that this book covers. So it was an interesting look at how deeply that slide can just occur and how quickly it can as well.
Yeah, and we talk about that a little bit with Kevin. And in the conversation, I think he's very honest and very upfront about what causes our homeless crisis in the United States and the kinds of solutions we need to focus on in order to reduce that amount.
Yeah, I really appreciated that Kevin points out that they are actually simple solutions, but simple doesn't always mean easy.
Exactly.
So let's get into that conversation with author Kevin Fagan on his book, The Lost and the Found, A True Story of Homelessness, Found Family, and Second Chances.
Kevin, thank you so much for joining us on Booked on Planning to talk about your book, The Lost and Found, A True Story of Homelessness, Found Family, and Second Chances. Can you start off by describing your background, life experiences that led you to eventually being able to write this book?
I've been a reporter for a long time. You can probably guess my age when I tell you for 50 years. I started out very young. I was raised kind of poor, kind of middle class, depending on what jobs dad had at the time. And then I got thrown out of the house when I was 16. Didn't obey orders very well, both Navy vets for parents, and put myself through college. And along the way, I slept in my car. I slept in a garage. I figured things out. And I'd always wanted to be a journalist from the time I was 14 on up. My mom had been a journalist in the Navy and had told me it was the best job in the world. And I think she was right. And of course, given my background, they say, write what you know. So I focused on poverty from the get-go. I also became a specialist in crime and just about everything. I covered the American West, serial killers, murders of all kinds, mass murders, disasters. I witnessed more executions than anyone around here. I just liked intense stories. And the intensity led me to homelessness in a deep dive kind of way, because I didn't want to just do surface stories. I wanted to immerse. And so I slept outside a lot. After college, I had been a traveling street singer, hitchhiking around, playing in the streets all over Europe and Australia, New Zealand. The streets were not a stranger to me. I knew how to stay safe. I knew where to go, how to negotiate. And so when I slept in the streets in San Francisco, it was fun. I liked it. I liked being around people for the full life cycle of the day and the night, because you hear things, you have conversations at 3 a.m. that you don't have otherwise. And that's where I learned over the years, which I kind of knew, and no one wants to be homeless. That's the thing. They get lost in their dysfunction. They get lost in their survival instincts. Counselors, and I've found this all over the country because over the course of my career, I did cover homelessness a lot of places. I did some in overseas. I did a lot all over America. And street counselors come by and say, gee, I've got a shelter spot for you. Or how would you like to go into some rehab? Or how would you like some mental health counseling or residential treatment? And the automatic answer is usually get lost. Screw you. Because people are stuck in their survival modes. They know where to go, where their teeth won't get kicked in. They know where to get food. They know who their friends are. They have their daily rounds. And if you're chronically homeless, which is about 30-40% of the population, depending on the city, those are the ones who are out in the street all the time. The rest of them are in shelters or places you don't see. And those guys are generally addicted to something or suffering from a mental health condition or both. And when you're stuck in that kind of dysfunction, you don't want people telling you what to do. You don't want to go in a shelter where someone tells you can't fire up your fentanyl foil or shoot up whatever drugs you're doing. You're just hanging on by your fingernails for the life that you know how to do. So the job is to persuade them to take the help, because there is help. There's not enough help, but there is help. And I've emphasized that over and over in all my reporting. I loved being able to do that because covering murder, I covered everything from the Zodiac killer to Columbine High to 9/11, the mass murders out here in California. You don't really learn anything from mass murders or serial killers, but you can learn something, at least from covering them. You're not going to learn anything from them themselves, but you can learn and pass on some knowledge and suggestions when you're covering homelessness. And I loved doing that because it felt like I was making a difference in life. Because my mom had told me, be a journalist. And my parents and I, we made up after I became a fully functioning adult with a career, and we became great pals right up to they're both gone now, but it's important to patch things up with your parents. That's one of my life lessons, and it's an important one. But she was always very proud of my journalism career. And again, what I wanted to do was make a difference. And I have made a bit of a difference. And doing this book was a joy to me. I just loved writing it.
I appreciate the comment of it's important to make up with your parents. I just lost my mom recently, and she struggled for many years with alcoholism, which is, of course, prominent in this story as well. So we had our own journey, and it's interesting how those stories just cross lines of so many families and that kind of strife. And to that end, you follow throughout the book the story of Rita Grant and Tyson Fielzer. So what was it that led you to focus on these two individuals out of the many people that you've interviewed? What drew you to their stories?
I could see a story in them. As a writer, as a reporter, you look for stories that you can turn into something that will have a narrative, a pull, a journey, a point. And I met Rita, 23 years ago, when I was sleeping on the street for 6 months for a series in the Chronicle called Shame of the City. And I described this in the book. She was remarkable. She was in a colony called Homeless Island, which was 12 addicted homeless people living on a traffic island right downtown, just not far from City Hall in San Francisco, where the panhandling was really good at a couple of traffic lights. And all of them at first told us to get lost. I was out there with Brant Ward, my photography partner for many years on homeless stuff. And when they tell you to do that, you just kind of smile and you keep showing up. And shoot the shit with them when you talk. You don't start grilling them on the street. And they began to trust us. And Rita was a tough nut. She'd been on the streets for a lot of years. And when her sister read my story on Homeless Island back in Florida, she read it online, she said, that's where Rita is and that's what's going on. So she flew out, found her using the story, and Rita was ready to take the help. There's a situation on the street where they say you're cooked. That means you're ready to take the help. You're tired of the life. And she did. She went back and she rehabbed beautifully. So we became friends because I did a follow-up story where I flew back to Florida and it was wonderful. She was in great shape. She needed teeth. I wrote a story. I mentioned that. A dentist gave her teeth. It was just all good. And we sent Christmas cards. We'd talk on the phone. It was really fun for the next 20 odd years. for the rest of her life. I don't want to give away the whole book, but she eventually passed away from cancer, just so you know what the narrative is. And Tyson, I met, just a few years ago. I was doing a story on a shelter, and he was sitting on a piece of cardboard near the place where the shelter was proposed. And I asked him, what do you think of the idea? And he was really smart, really cogent. He just smoked up his drugs, so his head was clear. When you're talking to chronically homeless people, you want to catch them at a time when they're not dope sick, so they're getting jittery and pissed off, or if they're having a mental episode, because then they're screaming at a telephone pole or muttering to themselves. You catch them in between when you can have a real conversation. Otherwise, you're having a conversation with the dysfunction. And there's always a real conversation to be had with people when you get them at the right time. He was great. I put him in a story with a bunch of other people and his photo, and his brother called me from Ohio and said, that's my brother. I lost him 7 years ago. Help me find him. So he flew out, and I knew where to look. Tyson was just passing through that day I talked to him. But we found him, did an intervention. I participated in the intervention. I didn't lead the way. Barron, his brother, had hired an interventionist, and Barron was, oh God, what a good heart that guy has. He was very invested in saving his brother. And I long ago abandoned the idea that I'm just a robotic reporter taking notes. Hey, what are you doing, sir? And no, you're a human being first. So my message to Tyson was, you take this help. This is what you need. Like Barron and Vicky, the interventionist, and our whole message was, you accept this or you're going to die. Because that's what happens to people when you're on the streets forever. Forever being often just a few years, because it's a hard way to live, and the drugs will kill you too. So he took it, and it was wonderful. And his life had a different arc. And after this whole tableau presented to myself, I thought about it, and I thought, I got a yin and a yang here. I can stitch together some journeys, because every story has to have a journey. And along the way, I can talk about some of the stuff that I've learned, what works, supportive housing, counseling, rehab, the kinds of things that this country doesn't have enough of. And I can also get on my soapbox a bit, which I left a lot of that to the end of the book, because I wanted to just let the narrative play itself out so that you can follow this journey and pick up some things. And then I make some conclusions at the end. And I wanted to be able to impart this knowledge that I'd accumulated over all these years. And the book was actually, once I had the concept, and I have an agent, and he sold the book, and someone said, here, take a few months off and write it, the thing just spilled out. Because hell, I've written thousands of stories. At the Chronicle, I had to do a count. I think I wrote 6,000 stories just at the Chronicle, let alone the other places, BBC, the Oakland Tribune, Fremont. I worked at several places before I got to the Chron. So writing is not hard. Organize it, do a little outline, and then just read your notes and spew it out. And it was fun. I got to say, it was really a joy to write. But the stories told themselves, which is what you want in a narrative. And the opportunity to be able to impart what I wanted to impart was terrific. I feel very grateful that I was able to sell a book or write a book and then sell it enough so that it's textbook in some universities, and hell, some guy in Nebraska read it. I'm very grateful for that. And thank him, please, for suggesting it.
Yes, I will do that. And I will say, after reading it, because it's such an immersive narrative experience, you really get to understand the experiences of both of these individuals and the factors that led them to become homeless and kept them in that situation for so many years. And I wanted to be able to give this book out to elected officials and others that don't quite understand, or maybe are suggesting things that we know, the individuals that work in this day to day, that's not the approach. And one thing with both Rita and Tyson's stories is that they both kind of show how you can fall into homelessness from relatively stable backgrounds. So what does their trajectory tell us about any structural vulnerabilities that our society has that would allow you to fall into homelessness in such an easy manner?
Mental health and drug rehab, drug intervention, and alcohol intervention. Alcohol and drugs, it's the same thing to me. They're both killers. And Jennifer, as you mentioned, I just wrote the obituary for a very dear friend who drank himself to death. And I've known many people, which I think I mentioned in the book too. It's a horror that it needs more help than just the family. There's this idea in this country that everything you have to do by your own bootstraps. That's bullshit. Because someone who is really immersed in a drug addiction or really immersed in a mental health difficulty needs outside help, professional help, because the chronically homeless people who I've known in the street, and there have been many, you don't wind up there unless you've rattled down the ladder of all your resources. First, your family gets tired of you. Then the counselors get tired of you. Then your friends get tired of you. And the shelters get tired of you. It's not a quick process. Some people it is. Then that's a catastrophe. But most people have to bang down all these rungs till they hit the street. And this country doesn't do good rungs. I lived overseas in New Zealand, Australia, and England, and all of those countries do better. They have national health, so when you need rehab for drugs or mental health, it's there. They have guaranteed housing, and they have living wage laws that mean that you're not going to be making minimum wage and living in a shelter. It's this country, it's astounding to me. We have people who have to work 3 crappy jobs and they still can't afford a place to rent. I did a bunch of those crappy jobs. I cleaned sewers with my hands. I was a janitor. I washed dishes, pumped gas. So I know what it's like to do an honest day's work. In fact, when I became a journalist, there was still that feeling that I'm not really earning a paycheck unless my hands are dirty. Just typing, they're paying me for writing stuff? What the hell is that? You should be able to push a broom or punch a cash register and have full dignity and make a living that supports you. And that was more possible in the old days. When I started out in the late 70s making minimum wage at little papers, I could afford an apartment and a car. You can't do that now, at least not in any city, which is a tragedy. Those other countries also have retirement plans that don't put you into poverty, that help you, because not everyone saves for their retirement the way they should. It takes a government plan or scheme, as they would call it overseas, to help you do this. And my dad used to tell me, save your money, son, get an IRA. I did manage to plan for my retirement because I saw so many people who were living hand to mouth or outside because they got to retirement age and they're screwed. It's a tragedy that we don't take care of people the way we do.
Yeah, one of the things that struck me about the story, and I don't want to give too much away either, is that Rita was in her 50s by the time she found herself in Homeless Island. And I get it. My mom was in her 50s when she started her downward spiral as well. And we came from a relatively privileged background. We were able to get her into rehab multiple times and make sure that she still had safe places to land as she navigated that. But not everyone does. And it's not always the people that you think it's going to be. It is the 50-year-old suburban housewife sometimes too. So I think we should be thinking about that.
I got to say, a lot of, maybe even most of the chronically homeless people that I've known were kind of shot down from the word go. Everyone starts out as a baby with all the hope in the world. You're a kid, nothing's gone wrong yet. You haven't done any wrong. And then as you grow, things happen. And for a lot of the troubled people, this actually goes for in crime reporting too, the abusive parents or neglectful parents grew up in foster homes where they were abused, or the parents knocked them around, or they were addicted to dope and addicted them to dope. And they never had a chance to stand up. So a lot of those folks, when you rescue them from the streets with programs and counseling, you're creating a life they never had. You're creating a successful life they need but never had. However, there are people like Tyson and Rita. Rita didn't grow up rich or anything. There were a bunch of kids in her household, but her mom worked really hard, provided well for them. She had every opportunity. Everyone has their different personalities that leads them to do what they do. Your mom in her 50s, people can go off the rails at any point in their lives, no matter what the resources are. There are plenty of drug addicts and alcoholics who are not homeless, of course. And it's people need help. And like you said, rehab over and over. I think the statistic I've always heard is it often takes 6 shots of rehab before something sticks. And I've got family and friends. Most people, I think just about everyone knows someone or has someone in their family, a friend who has struggled with this. This is not something that just happens to other people, so screw them. No, it's very personal for just about everyone. And you just can't give up. You only give up when the last breath happens. But you're right, the demographics, that's an important point. It can be anyone. And both these people in my book, there was no reason for them to go off the rails if we had adequate support. Tyson was dealing with mental illness. Rita was dealing with drugs. It shouldn't have happened.
And you mentioned earlier, you've had to walk the line between being the investigative journalist, but not being the cold-hearted person. And you chose to actively help Rita and Tyson's families find them and bring them home. Can you talk about how you think about that and how you navigate that line between the just cold, hard journalist and actually being a human?
Yeah, it's just how you have to do it, in my mind. I lecture a lot of college classes. I always have. Did a little teaching at one point, which is tough to do when you have a full-time job, but I thought it was worth a shot and it was interesting. But my main message to students is the number one rule for me is don't be a dick. Have a empathy, have a conscience. You're doing journalism because you love to write, you love to meet people, you want adventures. At least that was for me because I went everywhere for disasters and stuff and the street life. And you want to make a difference in life. You want to make life better. And showing and giving compassion to the people I write about. Once you've done it for a little while, you can learn how to set boundaries. I did not have Rita come live in my house. I didn't have Tyson meet my family and have Passover dinner. You have your boundaries, but you can listen with a compassionate ear and show empathy and care about them. Because if you don't care, homeless people in particular have really good bullshit radars. They can detect. They know when you're not sincere. And if you're just doing it because it's a story your editor said to bang out with 800 words by 5 o'clock, they'll pick it up. And you're not going to get really good information. You're not going to get the best quotes. Be a human. When you first start interviewing people, my thing now is I just shoot the shit with them. Hey, how's it going today? They're panhandling with a sign. I say, how's business? And if they've got the drug work sitting next to them, I say, you feeling okay? Did you get enough today? I'm not there to make them stop doing drugs. I'm there to see what their lives are about. And you have to be sincere. You actually have to care. If you don't care, if homeless people scare you or anyone you're talking to scares you or repulses you, then do some other kind of reporting. There's a lot of different kinds of reporting. You can do politicians, murderers, homeless people, man on the street things. I always like talking to homeless people more than most politicians because they're more fun, they're more honest, and they have better jokes.
We'll be right back.
What makes Next City different from other news outlets is the fact that we're solutions focused, locally based, evidence-based solutions.
Because our whole thing is spreading solutions from one city to the next city.
Over 45,000 people subscribe to Next City's newsletters. Readers come from city planning, from working in economic justice and community development. They might be working in transportation.
Some of our favorite feedback to receive is when folks tell us that they've ended up with ideas or tools that they can use in their own line of work in a completely different city.
A show about changemakers and their stories. Subscribe on Apple, Spotify, Good Pods, or anywhere you listen to your podcasts.
That made me think about, I'm pretty sure it was Tyson's story, but about how at one point he had mentioned how he hadn't talked to anyone, like no one on the streets. They just walk by him and ignore him, and how lonely that felt, that people would just act like he wasn't there. And you'll start to lose a little bit of your humanity when everyone just continues with their day and doesn't engage because they might feel threatened or fear them, probably unfounded.
Yeah, and it hammers you even further into your own isolation where you turn for relief from things like drugs, maybe sex in the alley. I don't know. Everyone's got their thing, but it's terrible. Most people walk by, they either feel disgust or fear or super sorrow, or they want to ignore them or give them a sad look. It's not so often when people actually want to stop and talk, but I often get asked, what can we do for homeless people? First off, it's a policy issue, national and local, which is a whole conversation. Do the typical volunteer things, food banks, soup kitchens, but as much as anything, stop and give people the dignity and grace of a conversation, of being seen for a moment. It's important because, like you say, most people just walk on by. Let them know that it reminds them that they're a worthwhile human being, worth talking to. And of course, again, don't talk to someone who's going through an episode of some kind, but get them at a time when they're ready to talk. And you can hear some crap that a lot of people will say. You stop to talk and they say, give me $1, or I really need $5 for the bus, or whatever. It's the conversation that matters more than the buck or the sandwich. The sandwich is always a good idea. Donuts, I like donuts for giving out. Cigarettes, I forget if I put that in the book, but I hand out cigarettes because you're a moment of relief. And it reminds them of what life could be like just in the slightest of ways, because we're all ripples in the water for people. And enough of those interactions, and they finally decide, okay, I'll give it a shot. I want to have a more normal life. And you can contribute to that.
So here in Lincoln, we're working on trying to get our first low barrier shelter built. We have the People City Mission that's been around for over 100 years now, I think, but not anything that has no barriers to entry. And I think it sounds like the same thing that you were describing in your book with the NAV centers. And that is a relatively new concept. I thought these were standard practice. They've been around forever, but it sounds like these kind of low barrier, no barrier facilities are pretty new. Can you talk about what they are and how they help?
Yeah, there have been different versions of them. Back in, mid to late 1980s, San Francisco actually opened up its first navigation center. Back then it was called a multi-service center, opened up by Mayor Art Agnos. It was a great idea, but what happens in most communities and what happened here was you get so many people in and you only have so much staff to help them. Eventually it just becomes a place where you can sleep and get a meal. And some counselors are available, but they aren't able to give the kind of attention to people that they should get. So then in 2015, we had a homeless director at the time called Bevan Dufty, who rediscovered the concept to bring people in. And the key to that, the absolute key to those kinds of centers is to have enough staff of counselors, rehab specialists. You need some guards or low-level guards to keep the peace in there, because you get dope sick, you get pissed off, someone steals some shit out of your bed, stuff happens. But you need enough staff there to make it a useful intervention. So they're inside, and then once they're inside, the term that a lot of counselors use, you want to meet them where they're at. You want them to be at a shelter with a roof where they don't have to worry about that. And then you can start intervening with the kinds of help and the attention and the navigating to resources that these folks need. Otherwise, it's not as successful. And what's happened with navigation centers here in San Francisco and in a lot of places is the mission creep. So many people need the thing, and it's not intensive enough. Now San Francisco is at another really terrific phase of leaning in on pulling people in and then working on it, not just giving them the bed and the sandwich. It's very important if you're going to do a low barrier shelter. What kind of barrier did you have before?
Right now in our system, you can't be high or using, or you can get kicked out if you're not participating in chores. From what I've heard, I'm not super familiar, but there seems to be a lot of barriers to getting into our one homeless shelter that we have here in Lincoln. They do relax them on inclement weather when it's below zero or extremely hot. So there is that, but there's definitely a need for kind of a low to no barrier entry in our city.
Yeah, you guys get snow. I was just in St. Louis and a couple other places where the snow was, you die in the snow. It's bad. And that's one reason people come to San Francisco, either homeless or not, because you're not going to die outside generally. It can get kind of cold, but nothing like that. And the trouble with no barrier, or the challenge with no barrier, is that they're messed up. They need their dope. A lot of people don't want to go into shelters because they don't want someone telling them what to do. They're used to doing whatever they're going to do, which frankly, if you're a full-on drug addict in the streets, sleeping in a tent, you're going to have to go steal shit usually to pay for your habit. Maybe deal a little bit on the side. You get your dope and then you cut it with something crappy like talcum powder or something, and then you sell bits. But generally, you got to do stuff that's not good. And so if you're in a shelter, you got people telling you what to do and have a curfew. Don't light up that meth pipe on your bed. If you're going to do low barrier, they're going to do their drugs. Let them do that shit outside when they want to do it. Because otherwise you're going to get dope sick people beating each other up because they're pissed off and they're going through the shakes. But it's better than having requirements, because you'll reach more people, and you want to reach them. You want to have access to them so that you can do your magic. You can work on it. And that makes a difference. San Francisco is finding, once again, that having adequate services in whatever shelter you got does make a difference. They're getting a significant portion of people who go into their newly rehabbed shelters. They're getting them into services. Services meaning drug rehabilitation, board and care homes, hopefully inpatient drug rehabilitation services, job services, stabilization, making lives better. And you can't do that if they're in the street. No one in the street is going to make it to some appointment. You go talk to Joe sitting on a piece of cardboard and say, meet me at 6 o'clock tomorrow and we'll see what we can do about getting you a job. No, just doesn't really happen.
Which is what is so alarming about what the current administration is doing, turning everything on its head, where for a decade now, we've been talking about housing first, getting people housed, and then you can work on treatments. And they're flipping that to be a treatment first approach. And as you're saying, like, how do you get someone to come in and engage when they're living on the streets? Whereas you're much more likely to engage and get them the help they need if they've satisfied their basic need of housing first.
Yeah, that's frustrating. I didn't expect any more from this administration. The problem is national, and then local communities have to deal with what shouldn't have happened to begin with. Like I say in my book, it's about 30% of the country lives at an actual poverty level, hand to mouth. 60 to 70% doesn't have more than $400 in the bank. That's why whenever these shutdowns happen federally, people start freaking out after a few weeks because they can't make it without a paycheck. What the hell is that? Yeah, and the current emphasis of defunding supportive housing, come on, that's exactly what you need. You need people inside with the support that is supportive housing. I can see where this mentality came from because this country goes through compassion fatigue. You probably heard that term, right? It's where the new surge of trying to help people happens, goes on for a few years, and people get impatient and pissed off. There's still too many bums in the street. Try something else. Get hard, throw them in jail, kick them out of town. Then you go through a period where you see, gee, that doesn't work. So then let's do the more compassionate thing. And then you go through a period where you see, gee, there's still a lot of homeless people out. Do something else. So we're in that do something else phase right now, which when you're coercing people, there are a couple of lockdown camps in Idaho and Salt Lake where they're just trucking homeless people and locking them up, saying you're not getting out till you're fixed, till you do rehab. Now, the idea that you can't get out until you do rehab at least says that someone in that chain wants people to have their lives better. On the other hand, is locking people up with what we want to be doing. Yeah, we're in a bad place right now in this country in terms of trying to do the right thing. It's not complicated. It's just the proper kind of emphasis and funding. It all comes down to money. Plus, not creating the problem to begin with. We don't have national health. We don't have guaranteed housing. We have shitty minimum wage laws. You fix those kinds of things, and you're not going to see homeless people. I was just spent 3 weeks in Australia. I used to play music down there too. And so I went to see my old mates, and they don't have homelessness like this. I think I mentioned this in the book, Melbourne City. The core inner city is 500,000 people. They were freaking out because they had 300 people sleeping in the streets. All of England has, their homeless population is about the same as San Francisco's. But they actually care and try to treat these folks in the street. I've talked to homeless directors of both those countries, and it's easier because they don't have the crisis to begin with the way we do. It's just, this country can just be heartless. A lot of great people with a lot of great ideas, great motives, and then a lot of assholes in charge. It's not good.
A lot of assholes in charge. So I loved your subtitle and how it talks about found family along the way. And how did the informal networks and communities that Rita and Tyson did actually build up on the streets? Because we're talking about the stories of two people, but there were many supporting characters throughout the whole book. So how did those networks serve them as they were in their homeless journey? And then the dynamic did change some when biological families entered back into the picture. So can you talk about that a little bit?
It's again about survival and community. Everyone living in a house or living in a tent. You want community. You want people around you you want friends. You want a feeling of safety. And the found family that they had, people grouped together, just like we do housed people grouped together. You got your circle of friends, homeless folks too. You group together. People who think the same way as you, who have similar values. A lot of times it's less so now, but historically it's been kind of grouped by what kind of dope you're doing. I did a map in 2003 when I spent 6 months sleeping outside for this series called Shame of the City. It was a 5-day series I wrote at the end of it. I did a map, and I originally wanted to. There are two languages you can speak. There's English and there's street. And in polite English, it's substance use, people suffering from substance use in the street, you're a junkie. And street people talk that way. So I made this map. I had crack land, heroin land. I broke it up into nations, and the editors made me turn it into territories. So it wasn't quite as catchy, but nonetheless, people did group. The heroin junkies hung out with each other. The meth guys hung out with each other. Meth guys were generally a little further from downtown where the best dealers were because they had all this energy, and they'd get on their bicycles. They'd run. You shoot up or you smoke up a bunch of meth and you're kind of high powered. Heroin guys, they get the nods and they just want to chill out. So you got to have other people around to watch your back. It was interesting. But these days, most people do a little of everything. It's less pure. Like fentanyl, a lot of people do fentanyl, and then fentanyl puts you sleepy. Meth kind of wakes you up. So they do what they call a goofball, a little of both. That way you don't get the super fentanyl folds, but you don't get super high, super energetic. And not everyone in the street is addicted to something, but the chronics usually are. That and cheap booze. You're not drinking fine wine. You're drinking Royal Gate vodka, $2.75 a pint.
So what message would you want readers of your book, listeners of this podcast, to take away? What is your main goal for having written this book?
Help foster a nationally community-minded, compassionate frame of mind. Stop this horseshit about national health is, oh, it'll be terrible. No, I've lived under national health in other countries. I've got friends in national health in other countries. It's great. It beats the hell out of what we got here. If you got enough money to afford a really good health plan, sure, it's great. But if you don't, if you're working hand to mouth or you're working at some place that either doesn't give you health insurance and then you can't afford the $1,000 a month to have a plan for you and maybe your family, which would be even more, it's terrible. You wait forever to get anything done. If you get anything done at all, you go to the emergency room. Thank God at least emergency rooms have to take you. But those ones, they patch you up and then you're back out again. It's just stupid the way we do that. And it's stupid the way we can't get a grip on wage laws so that you can have a dignified paycheck working. And the way I always hear these complaints that says, national health care would be terrible. They're full of crap. And you raise minimum wage, it destroys jobs. That's full of crap. I've written about that over the years too. It does not happen. You get a little and then it evens out and then everyone's lives are better. It's propaganda that prevents us from moving forward. And it's so irritating and it's so not community minded. When I was in Australia just a few weeks ago, their big crisis was how to restructure their mental health treatment system so that it's more community based. They actually have a mental health system that helps people. I mean, you can be in your home with counseling or you can be in a board and care. Here in this country, board and care's shut down because they don't get enough funding. And this bit of cutting taxes for the super rich and companies, sure, I think, getting rich, sure, get rich, that's fine. They make a ton of money as a company, but do fair taxation. I didn't pay any more taxes in Australia and England than I did here. But you hear, oh, God, if we do socialism like those other countries, you get taxed to death. That's bullshit. It's just, the trouble is our country's so big, most people don't ever go outside of it. Or if they do, they bounce through on a quick trip to the bars in London or something. It's a lack of awareness of what life is like outside of here. And that conversation, I get really tired of it. I spent those 50 years as a reporter thinking I was part of a system making life better. Now there's enough of the country that just doesn't understand, doesn't listen, or is mean, or generally I think the American soul is a good soul, but we're just not moving the direction we should. And efforts like you're talking about, low barrier shelter, do your thing locally. That's the thing. The change has to bubble up from the ground. Getting counseling, though, getting the right kind of case managers and getting enough case managers, that'll be key. Otherwise, the community is going to get pissed off because you're going to get people coming into the low barrier. And if they're not, I don't know if supervised is the right word, but if things go wrong in and around the shelter, people just get mad.
We just completed our first poverty elimination action plan, and it was actually came from our state legislature. One of our senators had passed a bill 2 years ago, I think it is now, to require the two biggest cities, Lincoln and Omaha, to adopt these plans. And going through that process, we could see the poverty rates going up in Lincoln, definitely concentrated in certain census tracts. But in doing the outreach and speaking with individuals that are experiencing poverty, it's just such a fractured system of if I need help just getting food, there's 8 or 9 different centers that you can go to, but some are open on this days and other days. And so trying to piece together just the philanthropic side of assistance is challenging, let alone navigating any sort of state and federal government subsidies. So it's just another issue with the way our system is set up these days.
It's a lot of work being homeless or poor, trying to get help, trying to get funding, endless bureaucracy that gets in the way. And like you said, oh, gee, go across town on Tuesday between 2 and 3. I'm taking care of my kid or I'm working my shitty job that doesn't pay enough. I don't have time to go over there. We just make it. And childcare. Don't even get me going on childcare. What the hell? Even in the late 70s when I worked at the BBC, they had childcare on site. You come to work, you drop your kid off on the first floor and there's childcare. Not even a question of it. Now it takes practically a full paycheck to get childcare for your kid. It's nuts.
So you mentioned earlier that it is difficult to get people to read books these days, but you happen to have a broad listenership here who loves books, and this is Booked on Planning. So what books would you recommend people check out?
Let's see. Let me look over on my shelf here. Tracy Kidder wrote one called Rough Sleepers, about a great doctor in Boston who helped the chronically homeless folks. Yeah, Jim O'Connell's the doctor. I just did a panel with him a month or 2 ago. A great guy. And Tracy essentially follows him around and talks to him or portrays what life is like in the street. And I think street life is very important to get across to folks in a realistic way. Of course, the book Evicted by Matt Desmond, great guy, won the Pulitzer a few years ago. These aren't easy reads, but they're super useful. I tried to write mine in a novelistic kind of fashion as much as I could. I wanted it to be a quick read. As a reporter, we always joke that the highest compliment you can get from your editors or people is that they read the story all the way to the end. Because most people, you get bored, you get tired, you get busy. I wanted people to be able to pull through. And both those books are really worth it. I got to tell you, Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. If you've never read that one, boy, that guy can write. And it gives the vision of poverty that totally pertains to today. And it works on your compassion button. It helps.
Evicted, Grapes of Wrath, both really great books. Been quite a while since I've read Grapes of Wrath, though. I have to go revisit that one.
I pick them up again now and then. It's good. And you read things differently at different times in your life. I read it differently than I did as a 20-year-old.
That is so true, yeah. Kevin, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast to talk about your book, The Lost and Found, A True Story of Homelessness, Found Family, and Second Chances.
Thank you. Thanks. You guys were a delight to talk with. And I wish you all the luck in the world on the programs that you're doing or that your city is doing. And it's really great that you're doing this and pushing this message out. Love it.
It's a very important one.
Yes, absolutely. We hope you enjoyed this conversation with author Kevin Fagan on his book, The Lost and the Found, A True Story of Homelessness, Found Family, and Second Chances. You can get your own copy through the publisher at One Signal Publishers by supporting your local bookstore or support the show through our page at bookshop.org/shop/bookedonplanning. Remember to subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts and please rate, review, and share the show. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next time on Booked on Planning.